Kara,
Yes.
I see you on twice.
Yeah, I'm gonna run the presentation from one of my computers, and then I don't have audio capability on that computer, so I'm also on my laptop.
Okay. I see you on twice.
Yeah, I'm gonna run the presentation from one of my computers, and then I don't have audio capability on that computer, so I'm also on my laptop.
Okay. All right, Kara, I'm gonna give I hope the right one, the ability to share the screen here. Did I give it to the right one?
Yes, thank you.
Kara, this is Audrey. I just wanted to make sure you knew I had started the stream
Thank you.
a little early so that we could make sure everything was good. We're picking up a lot of background noise. Please mute yourself if you're not going to be speaking. Thank you.
Look, Kara, can you hear me?
Yes.
Jose.
Hi.
Okay. Hello. Just checking my mic, that's all.
Thank you.
And Jason's here, just making sure you can hear me too.
Yes. Thanks.
All right.
I think we'll give it a few more minutes. I see 29 participants in the chat, so I'll just give a couple minutes for the stragglers.
ఈ ఎల్లో పువ్వు చూసంగానే బాగా పువ్వుతో వస్తుంది మా చెల్లికి నాకు నేను అలాగే అనుకున్నా మా చెల్లి కూడా అదే అన్నది చెప్దామని కాల్ చేశాను మీ దగ్గర అక్కడ ఉండేది
Okay, I think we can get started. Chair Crampton, Chair Macias, if you want to kick us off.
All right. Thanks, Kara. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for this joint meeting. So I'll run the transit part and we'll pass it to Jose for the active transportation. So first of all, I will call the transit committee meeting to order. So Kara, if you want to go ahead and take roll call for that one.
Yes, thank you. So we'll start at the top. Grant Anderson. Sean Banda.
Present.
Thanks, I got you, Sean. Ben Bitter. Kathy Borges.
Present.
Kathy Colbath. Dawn Coomer. Chair Crampton, I've got you. Sarah Allred for ADOT. Gabe
Sorry, this is
Elias.
Sarah Allred. My
Oh,
apologies.
thanks, Sarah. No problem. I've got you. Gabe. Eric Iverson.
I'm here.
Gotcha. Reed.
Yeah, I'm here. It says Diana, but it's really me. I haven't figured out how to change the names back yet.
Okay, I've got you. Thank you. Carol.
Carol's here.
Jeremy. Ratna.
I'm here.
Thank you. Kevin.
Here.
Gotcha. Jose.
Present.
Of course. Ellen Kennedy for Nicole McCarty.
I am here.
Thanks. Christine. Judy Ramos. Jesus.
I am here.
Stephanie Small. Jody.
Here.
Chris. Oh, got you, Jody. Kristen
Here.
and Heather.
Present.
Okay, so just to recap, we're missing Stephanie, Judy, Christine, Jeremy, Gabe, Dawn, Kathy Colbath, Ben Bitter,
here.
Grant Anderson. Oh, sorry, did I miss you?
No, that's okay. I had a little trouble logging in, but I'm here now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I got everybody. Is anyone else on the line that I called? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kara and Jason. So now let's open up the active transportation meeting. So the meeting of the MAG Active Transportation Committee is now called to order. Jason, can you take roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Okay. We know Grant isn't here. Is that correct, Grant? Okay. Bob Bean. Kathy is here. Stacy Bridge-Denzik. Stacy. Marielle Brown.
I'm
Nathan
here, but I was muted.
I'm sorry?
I'm here.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Thank you. Nathan Chadwick.
Nathan's here.
Thank you.
Hey, Jason, I don't know if you saw, but Stacy raised her hand virtually, so I do see her
Oh,
in the
Stacy.
participant window. Yes.
Did not see that. Thank you. Stephen Chang. Stephen. Susan Conclu.
Here.
Thank you. Tiffany Halperin.
Here.
Thank you. Okay. Stephen said he is watching, so we will add him here. Ann Aaron Basic. Ann. Okay. Jason Harris. Jason. Jeff King. Larry Kirch.
Here.
Ashley.
Here.
Turn your volume up a little bit, Ashley, please.
Okay, I'll fix that. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, here.
Donna Lewandowski. Chair Macias is here.
Here.
Jessica May.
Here.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy, did you join?
Yeah, she's here.
Okay,
I saw her in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you. Randy Proch. Randy.
I am here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Woodrow. Ward Stanford. Ward. Kenneth Steele is no longer a member of the committee. He's moved on, sadly, but we have a new member that's probably going to be coming on. Her name's Molly. I know she's watching out there, so I just wanted to say hello. She will be on the committee sooner than later. Garrett.
I am here.
Thank you. Robert Weisner.
Jason, Robert's out. This is Sean from the city of Buckeye. I'm filling in for both of us.
Thank you, Sean. Ryan Wozniak.
Here.
Thank you. And Robert is around, right?
Yep.
Robert Yabes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, thank you, Jose and Jason. So we'll go on with the meeting now. Just a reminder to everybody, please unmute yourself when you are speaking, and when you're not speaking, keep yourself muted so we don't get the background noise. Also, a reminder that members of the public were invited to submit written comments related to this meeting at azmag.gov/comment within 1 hour of the posted start time for the meeting. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 2, the Transportation Planning Program Manager's Greeting. Audra.
Welcome, committees of active transportation and transit. Today is our annual joint meeting of the two committees in a albeit strange circumstance. We are pleased to have you here today to discuss and talk a little bit more about areas of mutual interest. We are joined from folks across the country, California, Minnesota, and our friends down the street at Valley Metro on 2 topics to present today, and hope you find them of interest. Just a few announcements before we do get started. On behalf of Jason and our active transportation interests, our deadline for the fiscal year 2021 design assistance applications are due via our online portal by July 10th. If you have any questions or any concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to Jason. Also, Valley Metro has additional Valley Bike Month t-shirts, stickers, selfie frames, a bunch of paraphernalia for your newer or rescheduled bicycle events. Please contact Suzanne Day if those are of interest or you would like more information. Few matters of the committee interest in particular. There will be a July 21st meeting of Active Transportation Committee, and at this point, we are expecting cancellation of July's Transit Committee. Chairman Crampton, that completes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions offline. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Audra. And if you do have questions, please contact Audra after the meeting. So with that, we'll move on to item number 3, mobility hubs. I believe we have Marissa Mangan from San Diego Association of Governments. I don't know if she's first, or we also have Yasna Hadzik-Stanek from Minneapolis. Kara, who's our first presenter? Marissa?
Yes, Marissa. Thank you.
Okay, well, Marissa, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Can you guys hear me okay? Good? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Marissa Mangan. I'm a regional planner at Sandag, the MPO for the San Diego region, and was asked to kind of give an introduction as to how we're thinking and planning for mobility hubs in our region. And it's playing an important role in our regional plan that's set to be adopted and released next year in 2021. Can you go to the next slide? I wanted to, this presentation will focus on mobility hubs specifically, but I wanted to kind of make it clear up front that mobility hubs is comprised of one of 5 different elements that our regional plan is centered on. So we're calling this whole package of new improvements to our region transportation system as the 5 big moves. Kind of starting up at the top and working around the circle. Briefly, we have complete corridors, and that's including everything from our managed lanes on our highway system to our major arterials that are going to really prioritize bus, rapid transit, in addition to pooled services and shuttles, microtransit, on-demand services in a way that we've never seen before. The San Diego region has admittedly been behind other parts of the nation in regards to dedicated bus lanes and that type of infrastructure. So we're rethinking a lot of our corridors, both arterial and highway, in this new plan. With our transit system, we're introducing a whole new layer of high-speed, high-frequency commuter rail, subway system that our region does not have, and a way to get from one end of the region to the other in a lot faster time than our traditional rail service provides now. In addition to enhancing our existing light rail and rapid services to have dedicated guideways, higher frequency, just a higher quality experience overall. Mobility hubs, I'll of course talk about over the next few minutes, but we're thinking of them as not just single transit centers or transit stations where a lot of services converge, but whole communities where you really have a high saturation of shared mobility services that help connect to and from transit. And they're places where we have the highest concentrations of people, jobs, and destinations, and a lot of activities. Flexible fleets, we're categorizing as the wide range of shared services that complement the transit services to get people in and around all of the mobility hubs. And it ranges from micromobility, both personally owned devices, pedal bikes, electric assist bikes, electric bikes, one-wheeled boards, hoverboards, scooters, all different kinds of rideables, as we like to refer to them, that could be shared or personally owned, in addition to on-demand microtransit services, including smaller shuttles like neighborhood electric vehicles, and also car share, on-demand ride share, and even last mile delivery services that can deliver small parcels in and around mobility hub. And then the next OS is our way of digitally managing all of the infrastructure and services that's proposed in the regional plan. So not only providing users in the future with a mobility as a service experience so they can plan, book, and pay for all of these options, but also allow a platform for us to manage the services in real time, especially in instances where we may not have dedicated guideways on our arterials. We can dynamically change routing of on-demand microtransit services using this new platform. And we're starting first by creating a regional data clearinghouse and collecting micromobility data in our region to stand up the next OS and start small and then grow big over time. Our regional plan covers a time period of 2020 to 2050. So the whole package of services and infrastructure is something that will be unveiled next year. Getting deeper into mobility hubs on the next slide. Wanted to start out with a really simple cartoon that we created a few years ago as we were first getting our feet wet with the mobility hub concept. And back then we were really thinking about concentrating a lot of services in and around a transit station, along with depicting supporting land uses that are very important, making sure there's safe walkways and bikeways to connect to and from a transit service. In this case, it's a light rail service in our North County region, in addition to a wide range of shared mobility options, car share, shuttles, shared mopeds, and other supporting amenities like convenient pickup drop-off zones, wayfinding, secure bike parking over there by the transit station, parcel delivery services. So this was an illustration that gained, got a lot of attention, and we've used it over the years to kind of illustrate what we mean by a convergence of infrastructure services and amenities. Next slide, please. After developing that initial concept, we've changed it so that we can really hone in on a whole community and really allowing a mobility hub to do more than just make connections for first and last mile purposes. There are often instances in our region where we have a rail station or a rapid stop, and a denser employment area is actually 2 to 3 miles away from that stop. And so really bringing in a lot of the shared motorized services in addition to walking and biking allow us to define a mobility hub as, yes, still centered on a high frequency, high quality transit service kind of in the middle, and then extending the catchment area to encompass the whole community. And again, we're really focusing on hubs as having the shared services, the safe infrastructure to support and prioritize the movement of those shared services, and a lot of supporting amenities, everything from EV charging to passenger loading zones, flexible curb for mobile retail services to stage. We have a lot of examples coming up in the next slides to help illustrate all three of those checklist items, so to speak. Next slide. This is another recent illustration that we've developed as part of our current regional plan showing a mobility hub in an urban community, denser land uses, a new subway type of system that our region doesn't have at the moment, along with safer bikeways along the arterials, shuttles that are kind of modular so that they can connect and disconnect depending on demand. Of course, looking into the future and how that can all be digitally managed. Closing down sections of streets for temporary periods of time for events or pedestrian-only promenades, depending on the needs for that month. And just really having an area that folks want to be in, not just an area where they're traveling to and from to reach transit, but public space being a real important component. Citing amenities that are conveniently located near transit just to help someone get that minor errand done while they're walking to and from transit so that it doesn't require some separate trip with a personal automobile. Next slide. This is an illustration of a complete corridor, as we like to call them, assuming that we're within still the mobility hub kind of catchment area, but we're further away from the transit station in the urban area that I showed. So an extension of how the corridor gets people a mile or so away from transit, with the bike lanes still existing, connected vehicles in the lanes, kind of mix of different micromobility fleets, mopeds using the general purpose lanes, in addition to cyclists and other micromobility users using the protected bike lanes. Really rethinking curb space and allowing less of the on-street long-term parking and more kind of change throughout the day in how people use the curbs. So a lot of pickup drop-off activity, timed with transit services, areas for mobile retail services like the food truck looking vehicle on the left side to stage for an hour, maybe two, and just really being a lot more flexible with how the curb is used, because especially in our urban and employment center areas, the space is really in demand, and we need to kind of share the space amongst all the uses so that everybody can benefit. Next slide. So far to date, we've identified kind of a whole catalog of different mobility hub features, everything from comfort elements at transit stations to safer walkways and bikeways, a wide range of the motorized services captured in our flexible fleets options, and a lot of different support services and amenities. And we've created a catalog that we've placed online for anyone in our region, employers, developers, our local cities, of course, to use and leverage and find inspiration for how some of these features can be integrated in and around transit stations as we try to look to implement mobility hubs throughout the region. So we have examples here of interactive travel kiosks, citing the Link NYC example for places where folks can have access to Wi-Fi, touchscreen to plan their trip, find out information, about the community, what's available, what's going on at that particular time of day, USB charging ports for people that need to keep their devices juiced in order to be able to pay for their electronic fare payment and access all of the shared services that may be available. And then we can't forget about some of the support amenities like parcel delivery lockers that could be cited conveniently throughout a mobility hub. Next slide. This is just an excerpt from the catalog that we have online. Got some interactive menu to take you to the various different pages that provides kind of a definition of all the different mobility hub features as we had defined them a couple of years ago. Some elements in action, as we like to call them, case studies from other peer cities around the world that had implemented those examples. And so far we've gotten some good feedback, and it's been really helpful to help people think about what could be a right fit for their community or their development as they're thinking about integrating some of these options into their projects. Next slide. And we have to kind of click 3 times to allow these pages to appear. We'd hand selected a couple of example places throughout the region to come to develop profile sheets. And put apply the mobility hub concept to different communities: coastal, inland, urban, suburban. So this profile sheet is one we developed for the Oceanside community. It's the northwesternmost community in our entire region. Shares the border with the largest military base in our region, Camp Pendleton. And then further up north is when you can connect to Orange County and LA County, et cetera. It's an area where we have a lot of rail services converging. Metrolink from LA, Amtrak stops here, Sprinter light rail service that connects Oceanside to other suburban communities to the east, and a lot of different local bus services. And so this is really one of our gateways into the region from other parts of Southern California. And so initially we had identified 5-minute walk, bike, and drive sheds to think about, what kind of area was covered in terms of the whole mobility hub, and what did the demographics look like in that area? What types of mobility hub features could be most appropriate for Oceanside? Working closely with city staff that had already done some development of specific plans in that area, already having retrofitted some streets, and I'll show you a rendering of one of them in a moment. But just kind of starting to get our feet wet with applying the concept to a major community in our region. Next slide. Now I have kind of a slew of renderings that I'll kind of go through just to show more examples of how we're thinking about the mobility hub concept in different community contexts. One of the most recent projects Sandag has undertaken is executed an MOU with the Navy to develop a very large naval property that's no longer fully in use right outside of our airport near downtown. And so that whole area is going to be transformed into a massive transit center that features all different kinds of rail services on the bottom level. And then on the upper level, there's areas for pedestrians and retail. There's going to be housing, hotel. It's going to be a massive project. So we're calling this the Central Mobility Hub, and it's going to serve as an anchor mobility hub within our region for folks to access all different types of communities and other hubs that we may implement in the region, while of course being still proximate to downtown. Plans for an automated people mover to connect the Central Mobility Hub to the airport that's not too far away, and it's going to really integrate a lot of these rail services for the first time, while also carving out space for a lot of on-demand microtransit services and allowing good connections for active transportation. Next slide. This is just another view of the Central Mobility Hub as it's being rendered. So you can see the new construction with residential towers, hotel, retail, It's going to be a whole new place where right now there's just nothing except for kind of heavy to light industrial uses. In some areas on the lot are completely vacant, and so that it's going to be a new way to kind of revitalize transit and create a new urban community just directly north of our downtown core. Next slide. This is a rendering that we created for a mobility hub concept for one of our new light rail lines opening up next year. We have a trolley extension connecting our US-Mexico border with one of our major employment centers in the university community, and this trolley station is going to be located on the eastern side of UC San Diego College campus. A lot of the pedestrian elements are already being integrated into the trolley station as part of its construction, but we've really tried to help influence how other features could be integrated at the station. We were successful, for example, in getting a large pickup and drop-off zone integrated, and it's going to be constructed and ready and available upon station opening for all different kinds of microtransit services to use while still keeping separate space for feeder bus connections to the station. This is a station that doesn't have any kind of park and ride lot associated with it. So the idea of being able to connect to and from the station with these on-demand services to outlying employment in the suburban employment center beyond the college campus was really important. Next slide, please. This is an example of a mobility hub rendering that we'd created for the Pacific Beach community, a couple miles actually away from another one of the new Midcoast trolley stations. And it was just to show how the micromobility lanes and the pooled lanes that maybe start at the station 2 miles east would serve the community all the way to the sea. We're facing west in this rendering, and the ocean's just about 2 blocks away. And so it was a way to depict for the community how a lot of the improvements aren't just limited to the station area itself, but extend way beyond and really help create a much more multimodal corridor for Grand Avenue. Because right now it's just usually, it's a 3-lane on either side, packed with vehicles all the time. And so we're trying to figure out how we can convert Grand into a more pooled, prioritized environment and get some on-demand services available there in the years to come. Next slide. And this is the last rendering we have of Oceanside again. The Mission Avenue, we're facing west here towards the ocean. The ocean's about 5 to 6 blocks away. 5 to 6 blocks away is not only the ocean, but also the Oceanside Transit Center. That's kind of the gateway into the region, allowing folks from Orange County and Los Angeles to come down. It's a roadway that's recently been retrofitted to allow for the reverse angled parking. And has been newly designated as a Class 3 bike lane, but it doesn't have currently the density you see here. It's pretty much currently single-story retail. And so we worked with the city to develop something they were very comfortable with depicting with higher density, in addition to a wide range of new shared mobility services and supporting amenities like electric vehicle charging station, car share spaces, while still assuming, we're keeping the feeder bus service and new neighborhood electric vehicles that could operate in the area. Next slide. This is a map where we're kind of giving you an insight into where the highest levels of population and employment density are in our region. We have a very large county. It's not all depicted in these maps because most of our population and jobs are really in the western third of our region. The eastern 2/3 is mostly rural. There's some small villages here and there, but most of the population density is in the central part of our region, in the downtown and urban communities, kind of in the center and in our South Bay towards the border. And then there's some pockets up in the North County between Escondido and Oceanside up along State Route 78. And that's depicted with the pink map on the left side. On the right side are 14 major employment centers. We don't have our downtown core actually as our largest employment center in the region. It actually ranks 3rd compared to 2 other suburban employment centers, one in our University and Sereno Valley neighborhood and one in Kearny Mesa north of that. And then we have some moderate sized employment centers sprinkled throughout the region in our South Bay and North County. So we really do have a lot of people commuting every day all over the region, going to a lot of different suburban employment centers. And so these two these two pieces of information are just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data that we're assessing for our regional plan to not only cite mobility hubs, but to inform where we're placing a lot of those transit leap services, especially that new high-speed commuter rail service to better connect our urban communities to some of the outlying employment centers, while also using the employment centers that are suburban in nature as opportunities to kind of reorient where we're densifying and growing in the future. You know, right now, a couple of our largest employment centers are just that, employment with hardly any residential in them. And so in terms of projecting where our growth should occur, we're going to use mobility hubs as opportunities to better mix a lot of land uses in a way we've never seen before. Next slide. Right now, we're carrying out a propensity analysis to help determine where our regional mobility hub network should be placed. Using those two maps with data, in addition to other trip data that we've collected from our own household travel surveys, using some other big data sources from sources, like Teralytics and Streetlight, anything that can help us figure out where the trip patterns are occurring, not just for commute trips, but also leisure and non-commute trips as well. We want to always make sure that we're co-locating those mobility hubs with high frequency transit, not only paying attention to the commuter rail, but making sure that we're paying attention to where we're placing the enhanced light rail and next generation rapid, as we're calling them. And our propensity analysis is taking into consideration a wide variety of different criteria. Population and employment characteristics for sure, in addition to all of the locations in our region that have been identified as quote unquote communities of concern, low income, minority, and elderly. Those are going to play a huge role in where we site some of our mobility hubs and allow us to maybe saturate a lot of the shared services in places that haven't been able to have access to them in the past, even if they may have had access to one or two different transit services. It's just not enough to provide them with options. A lot of our activity centers throughout the region, we have a lot of military bases, a lot of colleges, hospitals, biotechnology, employment, financial employment, in addition to all of the different coastal locations that people are trying to get to. So those are all going to be taken into account. And we're really also looking at these mobility hubs as opportunities to convert a lot of the short trips, things that people maybe are using a car for right now for 3 miles or less, into some alternate mode, whether it's a pooled service or a micromobility mode, for example. So looking where majority of our short trips are happening in the region as well. And then once that regional network is identified, the plan, of course, will suggest land use changes in terms of where our population is forecasted to grow and what makes the biggest impact in terms of how we model those land use changes coupled with the new services in getting a higher alternative mode share, along with a wide variety of supporting policies, everything from flexible curb management to Vision Zero policies and things like that. So that's kind of a really high level overview of how we're thinking about mobility hubs. I have the mobility hub landing page on the next slide that folks can write down. And I know, of course, the slides will be shared afterwards. I'm happy to take questions after the presentations are done.
Thank you, Marissa. We have one question that came in on the chat from Kevin Burke. What do you envision is the right-of-way width of the mobility corridor?
So in terms of how I'm going to answer that is we're assuming that once our network is defined, every mobility hub is honestly going to need to be custom designed. We're taking the time for the first time ever to identify 20, 30, maybe 40 different communities within our region that show the highest propensity for a mobility hub. And so some of our hubs may be 1, 2, or maybe 3 to 4 miles in radius around. So in terms of a catchment area, we're going to try our best to kind of right size the mobility hub coverage for those areas. In terms of right-of-way width, are you referring to more the corridors that kind of intersect the mobility hubs?
He said yes.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, you showed a corridor and it had quite a few amenities across the width of it, including a pretty recessed bike lane in there. And so I was just curious if you felt you were going to have sufficient right of way to really implement something of that. design.
Yeah, in some cases, we may not be able to fully realize what was in that one particular illustration where we're still maybe keeping all 3 of the lanes, even though they may not all be general purpose lanes and some could be managed in addition to the bike lane. There's a lot of arterials already where there's going to be some tough decisions to probably first and foremost remove on-street parking and convert that to more of a flexible curb space. And thinking about if a lane could be general purpose sometimes, but then managed during peak periods and only be for pooled options. That's exactly what we're going to be looking at, for example, on our Grand Avenue corridor in the Pacific Beach Mobility Hub, where I showed that illustration with the beach being 2 blocks away. So it really will depend on the corridor, but we're trying our best to kind of manage the demands. We're in the process of also determining which flexible fleets are most conducive for each type of mobility hub. It's not that every mobility hub in our network is going to have all 5 or 6 of our fleet service types. We're really looking at kind of qualifying factors related to population and employment densities and other characteristics that would help warrant operation of those services. So I don't have like a right-of-way number in mind. But as we dive deeper into some of our communities and we start creating, streetscape designs and 30% designs for some of our more complete corridors, we'll have more information.
Great, thank you.
Chair Crampton, if it's okay with you, can we hold the rest of the questions till after this presentation?
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah, we've got them all noted there in the chat. So Christine, Ellen, and Judy, we will get back to you on those questions. Thank you, Marissa, for the wonderful presentation. I just wanted to mention the City of Chandler recently updated its transportation plan, and we really looked towards Sandag as a model for innovation in this area. So I think you really are kind of setting the bar nationally. So, okay, now we'll get on to the next presentation. Jasna Hodzik-Stanek, did I get that right?
You did, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me on today. My name is Jasna Hodzik-Stanek. I'm a transportation planner with City of Minneapolis Public Works, and I am the project lead on our Mobility Hubs pilot. So today I will provide a brief overview of background of how we really came to this idea of piloting mobility hubs. And then I will share some findings from our 2019 mobility hub pilot, and then we can take some questions at the end. Just kind of briefly to cover, our pilot is very much something that we did with like quick temporary treatments that will kind of set a vision for a long-term capital program. So what I will be sharing here is things that we actually tested on the ground last year and that we plan to do this year as well. Next slide, please. You can go to the next. So how do we define mobility hubs? Working with the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Collaborative, which I will talk about shortly, we came up with the following definition for our region here in Minneapolis. Mobility hubs are physical places where people can connect to low or no carbon transportation modes, including transit, shared scooters, and shared bicycles in a safe, convenient, and desirable way. Next slide, please. Mobility hubs are deeply rooted in our city's 2040 plan vision for transportation. Our 2040 plan received some national recognition in terms of what we're trying to do with density. So we know that with increased land use density and growing population, single occupancy vehicles are no longer the answer or sustainable mode of transportation. And we need to provide and facilitate first and last mile transportation options while relying on transit as the backbone. So mobility hubs are also reflected in each one of the goals of our current draft 10-year transportation action plan, and are also specifically called out in the technology topic of the plan, which is something new to our city and the plan that we're incorporating, and it touches on everything from autonomous vehicles to shared mobility and electrification. Next slide, please. So to really understand the origin of this pilot, I want to rewind back to 2016, where it all began with the Smart City Challenge application and the local interests showcased in shared mobility. I mentioned the Twin Cities Shared Collaborative, Mobility Collaborative. So in 2017, our region came out with the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Action Plan, which was developed and called out mobility hubs as a recommended strategy. From there, the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Collaborative was formed, including various subcommittees, and one of those was created just to solely focus on mobility hubs. Last year, that subcommittee on mobility hubs hosted a regional workshop that brought together over 80 individuals from the region working on transportation, land use, and design to really lay out the foundation for what the mobility hubs could look like on a regional scale, and to also build awareness and excitement around this new concept in the Twin Cities, but really much of the nation. I think a lot of cities are thinking about this concept, but not a lot of them have really piloted or built anything out yet. Next slide, please. Through the Smart City Collaborative and Transportation for America, City of Minneapolis worked with Arcadis to identify potential mobility hub sites, as you can see here, by combining 32 different layers of data, such as vehicle availability, public service centers, household income, non-English speaking household, healthy food access, and other factors to identify areas of equity. Through that kind of data lens, we came up with, as you can see on the right, the map that's of those 12 locations that are located in our areas of concentrated poverty, which are in North Minneapolis, and as you can see, those pink areas there and southern end. In addition to this lens, neighborhood groups were instrumental in filtering the data-driven location selection through local expertise on their community. So that was before we even started piloting things last year. We went out to our existing committees in these areas, our neighborhoods, and we asked them, what do you think of these locations? So data was a useful lens to identify initial opportunities, but partner engagement ahead of implementation played a key role in the final site selection. Next slide. So given all this preliminary work that took place over the course of a couple of years and the workshop early last summer, and building off the momentum and excitement from the regional workshop, the city hired a local design firm to pilot the first 12 mobility hub locations. Next slide, please. Since mobility hubs are relatively a new concept in the region, the piloting process provided an opportunity to do a couple of things: test possible mobility hub interventions, conduct interactive engagement around the concept, and really inform a long-term approach and larger strategic investments. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this was all very kind of quick and dirty, low-cost things that we did last year just to introduce the concept to communities, get the community involved, and really with the idea of building out a capital program that will, where we can build out some of these permanent features. So the Mobility Hub pilot was designed to create an interactive platform for community voice to shape the development and implementation of the basic Mobility Hub concept. Next slide. In terms of pilot elements, what we kind of, put out there in the field last year, we had specially made furniture. You can see here on the left, that was constructed to be durable for short-term use, colorful, and then also provide multiple purposes, whether it's for seating, gathering areas, and to frame bike, scooter parking or buffer from car traffic, which is something that we did, which I'll talk a little bit about some of our findings. Given the constraints with space, we had to use some space on our right of way and, put scooter parking or bike parking in place of a car parking. And we use these kind of blue boxes to, as a buffer for that, or to identify those areas. We also had signage. This is something that really through that regional workshop, we want to land on colors that are, similar to our region, that whether you travel from Minneapolis, to St. Paul or another city in our region, you can see this beacon or wayfinding, and you'll know that you are at a mobility hub, and this is where you can find additional modes. So we had some wayfinding that really pointed people to local destinations that are accessible by walking, biking, and transit routes. We had this beacon sign, this go. This became kind of our beacon, and underneath that we have the modes that you can find at a mobility hub, and this will be expanded, over the years. We had landing signs to denote our scooter, bike parking, and seating info. And most importantly, we made sure to translate this to Somali, Spanish, and Hmong, which are our most spoken languages here in the region. And then finally, we had also a social aspect to our Mobility Hub pilot that included planters that you can kind of see in this top photo on the right. Solar phone charger, magnetic poetry, and then information box where we can actively seek feedback from folks as they were interacting with the elements. Next slide, please. So we all know that engagement is a two-way street. So the top priority of engagement was to understand how everyday users at the site experience the current environment and responded to the pilot interventions. We did this through various methods, including meetings, online paper surveys, and on-site intercept surveys. So I will just quickly run through these. Next slide, please. For our meetings, as I mentioned earlier, these were really instrumental. Initially, as you know, with a pilot, those of you who have worked on pilots, you don't really end up with what you started with when it comes to a pilot. So it's very interesting to kind of learn as you go. And I think having these meetings ahead of implementation really helped us hone in on some of the details and the locations and such. Next slide. The survey that we did have will address key elements of how users in each neighborhood interact with the current transportation options and what barriers they experience. Next slide. And then we also had pop-up events where we were able to provide mini grants to artists and community organizations who kind of did these events on site, kind of a unique way, and enabled local artists and rooted organizations to take part in shaping the project narrative. And as we all know, narrative is very important. Next slide, please. So what we learned is that 64% of users reported that pilot improvements made them more likely to use the transportation options at the hub. Engagement events also provided the opportunity to distribute information on access and appropriate use of shared mobility. So this also included, we invited a lot of the private companies to mobility hubs. We had these events and they were able to distribute helmets, give out test rides. Scooters are something that can be intimidating to folks, or even biking. So just having that space and freedom to kind of try it out first. And then also a lot of these private companies through our agreements are required to have a low income program, which not a lot of people are aware of. So that's something that we also did, is we had ambassadors on site from those private companies who can sign people up for the low income program. Next slide. So through all this, next slide. Really these were the themes that emerged, and you can go back on the pie slide. So what is most important to making your trip better? Really, these are, some of the things that came out, with top 3 being access to more transportation options. People want to see more options, some that are accessible by all, where you can provide, with a lot of these scooters and bikes that you can put your groceries on. Second theme we really heard a lot about was feeling safe, and then places to sit and gather. So I'll just briefly walk through these and let me know if we are at time. I can maybe shorten some of these, but with seating, really, we found that was something that's, it's especially important to facilitate comfortable journey for older adults, children, and people with heavy bags, physical mobility, and challenges. During the pilot, we did encounter some situations where seating had been removed from a bus stop or sidewalk due to previous incidents of negative behavior. So while it's important to take these concerns seriously, it's critical to understand and clarify the root cause of that behavior. So, removing a bench will not remove these challenges that underpin negative behaviors, but adding a bench will make many people's trip significantly better. So, my colleague came up with the term, a bench is just a bench and a bench is good. It's as simple as that. You can click through. And those are just some of our kind of findings, short-term and long-term. For safety, you can click again so those things show up. For safety, this is really a key driver to utilization of mobility hubs. Safety consists of both personal interactions and physical space concerns from adjacent car traffic. Many people who were engaged with during this pilot brought up feeling unsafe. So, some lessons learned, recommendations for future is really including different approaches like adding enhanced lighting, providing phone charging station, placing ambassadors to help facilitate positive activities and interactions at mobility hub sites, locating mobility hubs near existing hub activity, and then coordinating with our Vision Zero efforts and our program to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries by 2027. Next slide. And you can click again. For space, really, this one, users want the flexibility and convenience of having multiple transportation options to fit their trip needs. Yeah, the biggest constraint is really providing these options at each hub. In terms of space, this was the major constraint to really provide the full range, whether it's having, placemaking and transportation options and having events and making it all accessible and safe. So this pilot did demonstrate that close proximity of multiple mobility services is key to a cohesive hub. Really, to maximize transportation options available in space, future mobility hubs could use several strategies, including developing site layouts that preserve accessible, comfortable walking spaces and keep mobility hub options in a cohesive, tight arrangement. Utilizing on-street parking spaces where practical to maximize available space for mobility hub elements, such as you see here in the photo. Expanding the number of mobility hub sites, so more options are reliably available in more places. And then continuing work with mobility service providers to ensure mobility hubs are priority sites for distribution of shared vehicles. Next slide, please. So maintenance is also key to creating effective year-round spaces. Something you all don't have to deal with and can save a lot of time, money, resources on is winter maintenance. But really there is a component to year-round maintenance, whether it's, having plantings, signage, and something, that some of these communities expressed to us where they were really happy to see that someone was there constantly, whether it was watering the plants or changing them out, and just showing that care in some of these places that have been long forgotten and making them take pride in their community. And, even simple as that. So something to consider for future things that we learn is identifying maintenance responsibilities and allocating tasks to most efficient entity possible. We are exploring an ambassador pilot program this year with our mobility hub sites where we can pay hourly to someone to be out there to maintain it. And there's a lot of other things that I can cover on this. But due to time constraint, I will move on to the next slide, which really I want to highlight the importance of collecting trip data before and after and data evaluation. I know you can't really read this diagram, but this is really an important step for us. And basically what it illustrated is that transit ridership sites seem to have high use of bikes and scooters where we did place them at these mobility hub sites. There are a lot of variables when it comes to transit, why people, we didn't really see like correlation between mobility hub and transit due to many variables. But this points to how closely related the success of a mobility hub is to transit ridership. It is also important to note that adding bike share and scooters close to a bus stop did not make ridership plummet, which suggests that people are not substituting their whole trip for bike scooter, but rather they're working together. And this data will kind of serve as a start for us as we collect this data year after year. And I'm almost done. Next slide. Something else we'll be doing is safety improvements this year. So at a couple of sites that we selected, we'll be trying out hardened center lines to really make it easier for people who are walking, biking, scooting to mobility hubs, to make it easier for them to access. You know, that earlier graph kind of showed that some of the mobility hub sites that were near high traffic areas didn't really see a high usage of scooters or bikes. So it's really important to have this kind of safety element here. So what's next? Next slide for our mobility hub pilot, really documenting and standardizing our process. Given everything that's been happening, you know, with COVID and the recent killing of George Floyd, which happened here in Minneapolis, and the subsequent protests, we kind of also are rethinking our mobility hub for this year and really focusing on that safety conversation and working with communities. But long-term, we want to build out a capital program. Like I mentioned, we also want to couple this with our EV mobility hub project, which is with one of our car share providers here. And then we want to connect it with our mobility as a service pilot, which is the concept of a multimodal trip planning and payment option where you can access payment and plan your trip all through one app. So next slide, I know I just quickly ran through all of that, but we do have our 2019 pilot report now available online. There might be some, if you try to access it, given the high volume we're seeing right now on our website, you might have to refresh it a couple of times for it to work, but you can find all the findings in there as well. So with that, Q&A.
Thank you, Yasna. So we have quite a long list of questions to get through. Some of them directed at Yasna, some directed at Marissa, some could be addressed by both, I think. So we'll start off from the top. Christine McMurdy had a question about financial mechanism that supports transit. And this was for both Yasna and Marissa. What is the financial mechanism that supports transit in the area, and how much federal aid do you rely on to support it? So Yasna, why don't you go first?
So given that our pilot is very, like I mentioned, temporary, quick build, it did not require a lot of funding last year and this year. And a lot of that funding actually came from outside grants. So we're one of the ACCC cities, part of the climate challenge. So we were able to receive some grants through that, and then a Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. So a lot of this has been really, the pilots have been sponsored by outside grants.
Thank you. Marissa, do you want to tackle that question from San Diego's point of view?
Unmute myself there. In terms of our regional plan as a whole, it's obvious it's a mix of federal, state, and revenue from our local sales tax measure, which of course has been impacted because of COVID this year. For mobility hubs specifically, so far we've been reliant on planning grants to get things started, either through Caltrans or through the FTA's TOD planning grant that helped us complete the Midcoast Mobility Hub strategy specifically. Right now, we're actually struggling to figure out where are all of the dollars going to come for implementation. We've already used CMAQ funding for years to run our TDM program, and the type of mobility hub implementation we're thinking about, kind of designing complete corridors within the hubs and then implementing pilots, that funding source is proving to be challenging to use. And we've been having active conversations with FHWA about, are some of these things going to qualify as maybe experimental projects, for example. So we're still trying to figure that out actively now. I feel like we have enough to get us through planning, and then when it comes to pilots of flexible fleets or redesigning some corridors, it's becoming a tougher sell, and we're actively working on figuring out how we're going to fund things in years to come. SANDAG actually administers our own grant programs for local cities to implement bike and walk improvements and other planning efforts. So our regional plan could direct us to retrofit some of our grant programs to be more mobility hub implementation focused. And there could be an opportunity to incentivize our local cities to implement pieces of a mobility hub while we continue to work with developers and employers to do things in non-public right of way.
Thank you. Next question from Ellen Kennedy. This could be answered by both as well. Marissa, why don't you start? What impact is COVID having on your thinking about high capacity transit and mobility hubs?
We're thinking about that a lot as we're trying to release our initial vision to our board of directors this summer. Transit's still included as an important component, but we're thinking a lot about how vehicles could be designed to better separate folks. Having privacy screens in between seats to separate folks from each other and allow them to prevent droplets and such from getting from one area to another. Self-cleaning bots for a lot of the vehicles, self-cleaning surfaces that are maybe nanoseptic or other in nature that are already being implemented on some micromobility devices like fleets that are being deployed in cities. And so all of the ways in which the vehicles themselves can be kept clean while maintaining the really robust measures that our local transit operators have already put into place since day one to keep stations clean, keep vehicles clean on a daily basis. So transit's still going to prove to be an essential mode, especially since most of our region's commute trips can't all be teleworkable, and we're coming out with a recent local report on that to prove to our board of directors that transit's still going to need to play an important role. And even when we do maybe have folks teleworking part of the time, we're finding that some of those non-commute trips have increased. And we need to still find ways to reduce single occupancy vehicle travel despite some of the increase in telework in our region. And we're, of course, like many cities across the US, many regions trying to find ways to better incentivize the use of micromobility, given that we have the perfect weather for it, yet we don't have mode share that's as high as other cities in much colder places, and it needs to change.
Thanks, Marissa. Yasna, would you like to tackle that question about COVID and how thinking about high capacity transit and mobility hubs might be changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did a lot of thinking around this. I would say, with this year's pilot, we had a lot of internal conversations with our food and sustainability group, with our health department. Really, our scooter share and our bike share system is already out. So we're not really doing anything around, like, it's kind of on them, they provide those cleaning services. But our thinking was more of how can we use mobility hubs to go beyond just mobility and use them as food distribution sites. That was something actually that took place at one of our hub sites following the protests. And since some of the grocery stores were gone, the community organized a food distribution. And we have vacant lots near some of these mobility hub sites. So we really want to repurpose them where people can come and really access other resources than just mobility. Other thing is, we'll be kind of providing self-cleaning items and signage and things like that. But really for us, it's thinking of like, how can we go beyond mobility to really kind of provide additional amenities for people who need them.
Thank you. Next question, I believe, was for Marissa's presentation, although Yasna, if you want to add to it after, feel free. But Marissa, could you share how the data-driven planning was performed, the process, how long did it take to obtain that information?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it was all about first establishing our region's quote unquote critical connections for both commute and non-commute purposes. We've probably spent the last 4 or so years collecting some of the data to make that happen. So every few years we do conduct a household travel survey, and the last one that was conducted in about 2016, 2017 relied on trip diaries that were smartphone based. And so a lot of good information about updated mode share information was collected and really helped inform our modeling team's efforts to recalibrate our travel demand model. We do an even more frequent commute behavior survey to collect information from folks about their travel choices and options. And then, like I mentioned before, it was our first time actually experimenting with Teralytics data. We'd collected some street light data, so both being cell phone tower based data to get information on trip patterns. And really making a focus on not just the commute, but realizing that there are a lot of variety of other trips that people are making around the region that are generating emissions. So it's been about a few years process.
Thank you. Next question is for Yasna. So Sarah Allred says, love the look of the block seats, but don't you get a lot of trash stuck in the holes? Are they easy to clean underneath? Do these get moved? And then Yasna, while you're up, if you wanted to address anything further on your data-driven planning approach, feel free to add to that as well.
Yeah, that's a great question on the seating. Hence why we do pilots. We learned a lot from those blue boxes, and you're right. Some people did, throw trash in them. So this is where the design firm that we did hire, they went out there and also did a lot of maintenance, which is why they're looking to pilot an ambassador program this year for some of that work. Also, it did kind of teach us that not having those holes on top is a good idea. So we are rethinking our design process for some of that furniture as well. They are easy enough to clean. Would just take out the trash given like the size of the holes, but they are meant to be movable, and we really saw people take ownership of them. If, let's say, one of the transit shelters didn't have seating in there, people would take it in there and move it. So really they're meant to be kind of mobile and just, for people to take ownership of that. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Oh, if you wanted to address anything further about the data-driven planning approach and what that process was like.
For site selection, or I'm sorry, I missed the initial question.
Yeah, I think the question was raised for the San Diego presentation, but yeah, I think it revolved a lot around site selection.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that earlier through our work with Transportation for America and Smart Cities Collaborative. We were able to obtain services pro bono of Arcadis, an international firm that really helped us put together large amounts of data sets, a lot of it based on equity, to really hone in on areas where people rely on other options. And so that was very helpful for us to really get an idea. We also included St. Paul, our twin city, in that analysis as well. But beyond the data-driven, I think it was really eye-opening to run that data or those locations by the communities first, and before putting anything out there. So that was another lens that really was helpful in addition to data.
Okay, thanks. And then one last question for you, Yasna. Is a central transit agency responsible for maintenance of the transit stops, or is that on the cities and towns?
Yeah, so with the pilot, as I mentioned, regionally we're thinking about this idea, and it's, something, I think the ownership question is still kind of out there as far as who will own this regionally. And obviously it won't be us. I think we've started those little steps to learning what is needed, how much capital investment will be needed for maintenance and things like that. We've started the conversation around branding, some of what do we use as branding, like these recognizable elements that you'll see throughout the region. But really the firm that we hired was responsible for all the maintenance at the 12 locations, which is why we kept it small and manageable. But really, this is telling us a lot what we need to invest in the future when we create a larger program. But I think essentially the idea is that our, regional transit agency would kind of take ownership of the mobility hub region-wide.
All right, thank you. And then the final question I have is, I think, more directed toward Mag. I guess I'll let Audra start, but is there any leadership in the Phoenix region toward mobility as a service?
Hang on, trying to get my video to start here. So I think that's really a question reflective back to what our priorities in the region are. And, it's a good time for those kinds of conversations as we build and develop our next regional transportation plan. I don't know that that's been a high priority necessarily that we have coalesced around, but you continue to see a lot of these themes. And some of the reason why, we thought today's presentations would be of merit is because we've heard individually from member agencies some interest in these topics, mobility hubs in particular, but we also saw it in our RTP call for projects. The reality, of course, is that we have a limited amount of funding, and as are the questions already identified, and I'm sure our friends in California and Minnesota can attest to, you always have more needs than you have available funding, and it comes down to trade-offs and what our overarching goals are. And I think, to Ryan's question, is it's to our policymakers, are we really interested in these kinds of quality or questions of equity as it relates to our overall constituency, or moreover, are we wanting to reach goals of reduced single occupant vehicles? Certainly in our region, we are an air quality containment area. We have those sorts of issues we have to address. Our RTP, our federal funding has to accommodate for. So I don't know, I think, Ryan, that's an introspective question to our leadership, right? And, one of the reasons we have modal committees that sit and consume this kind of information because we want to identify what our regional priorities are. And certainly just reviewing the call for projects, I think we have a wide suite of interests that span a variety of important topics. This is some of those that we saw. And I think it's going to be our elected officials who are going to really inform ultimately what our highest priorities in the region are as we build our regional transportation plan. So I don't know if that's a good answer necessarily, but it's really more to us, I think, to decide. But, with that, I know that we have another presentation as well, Chair Crampton, and we're already past our 2 p.m. mark. And so I don't know if this is a good opportunity perhaps to pivot over to our friends at Valley Metro and really thank our guest speakers for their presentations today. We have their contact information. We'd be happy to provide those details to our transit and active transportation committees for further information at a later date.
Yeah, thanks, Audra. Yeah, that was the last question. So thank you so much, Marissa and Yasna. Really appreciate the presentations. You guys did a wonderful job. And certainly there's a lot to learn from that we can take and hopefully use here in the Phoenix region. So thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next agenda item, number 4, safe and accessible connections to transit. And for this item, Omar Peters with Valley Metro will be presenting. So Omar. Omar, are you on?
Hear me okay?
Okay, now we hear you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm a transportation planner, Omar Peters at Valley Metro. And today I'm going to have a discussion quite similar to the topic which was heard about in San Diego and Minneapolis on safe and accessible connections to transit. This topic will be familiar to the Transit Committee folk since I presented this is a follow-up to an item I presented at the April RTAG. So today is, at the RTAG, we presented kind of some examples from peer agencies of how they're attacking this issue. And today I'm going to have a follow-up on exactly what our region can do. And it's going to be a short presentation, and then want to open it up, open the floor up to really talk about how this can apply to a region and get an ideas from you guys. So, but 20 minutes, just going to cover, 10 minutes, just going to cover some of these slides I have here. So next slide. Just to talk about why this is important, this data point here is one that I think is a good place to start. So 92% of our riders, the Valley Metro, the transit riders in the region, walk and bike to transit. So walking or biking to that station, a light rail station, or to that bus stop. And this information we know from the most recent origin and destination survey. And it has been kind of trending around this number for the past 5 years or so. You see there, so it's about 6% bicycling and 86% walking, and the remaining 8% is driving, carpooling, skateboarding, and such. Next slide. So really, we see walking and biking as being part of the transit experience. So the transit experience is not just that person sitting on that bus or that light rail vehicle, kind of that purple, but it's also how do they get to that station or stop? How do they access the station? How do they access transit? And then once they get off transit, how do they get to the final destination? So really seeing that as part of the transit rider experience as a whole. Next slide. Another part of this also, on the why this is important, it is aligned with the regional values. So from the MAG regional values map and Appro from 2019, we saw from that survey that the region, residents of the region really see this as safety of the transportation system as one of the top priorities. So 67% they're saying improving safety and reducing crashes as a top priority. Next slide. So what are the goals of doing this effort of looking at safe connections to transit? So we really see it as being two parts, the partnership and planning. And then the partnership, it's really to partner with our member agencies, so the cities, towns, and villages, to create a transit system that is safer and more viable for all of our riders. Really see this as it shouldn't be, the burden shouldn't only be on the agencies, the member agencies, to create safe walking and connections to transit, because really it's a regional issue. The transit system is a regional amenity. It connects people from one city to the other. So the connections to get to transit should be a regional priority also. And also to really further support the investments in transit that we've already made, that the member cities have made, and the region as a whole has made, and really to make that investment further supported, really need to improve that connection to transit. So the other part of the goal, we see that there's really an opportunity to further some planning around that idea, and really creating a document that really identifies potential projects that can be done to improve those connections to transit in each of the member cities. And really this will help member cities prepare for any funding that may become available, to have a prioritized list and get an understanding of when they can improve into a transit area, or what projects are most important with a prioritized list. And this, of course, can include projects already identified by the member cities, but are not already funded. Next slide. So how do we go about accomplishing these goals? So really see these goals, getting to those goals, kind of two phases. So the first phase is conducting an analysis to do that prioritization, to see which bus stops, rail stops across the region we need to focus on first. Phase two, next slide. Phase two is really partnering together with member agencies to take the list that we prioritize in phase one and go out to those transit stop areas and look to see what projects, what improvements can be made to those areas. And again, this could include ideas and projects that are already have been identified in each of the jurisdictions. Next slide. So that's phase one. What can that look like? So we have done some work on this on the transit, the light rail stations, where we took 16 different data measures that fit into these 4 categories here to prioritize our rail stations. We see that similar effort can be done for bus stops, where we're looking at issues or data points such as in safety, with the number of collisions that happened, either half a mile or quarter mile to that stop or station. looking at access, how do people currently get to that stop station using survey data, looking at the ridership of that stop, and then the road network in that area, or the bike lanes, what's the speed limit and speeds of that road network. Next slide. So this is a sample from looking at the one data element, the collisions in the safety category for one station here in Midtown Phoenix on Osborne and Central Road. So just to give an example of the type of data, and looking at this in a half-mile radius, this we can kind of see, okay, where the issues are located in that station area. The brighter color is showing high frequency of collisions. The plus sign showing a fatal back-of-head collision. Yeah, so this is just a sample. Next slide. So putting all of these data measures together for light rail, we were able to identify kind of those high need areas, the high need station areas. And just as an example here, we identify the highest need in each of the 3 rail cities. So Phoenix, the Osborne Central station location, Tempe, the McClintock, Apache, and Mesa, Alma School Main Street. Next slide. The phase 2, so where we want to go with this is after we have this analysis completed for both bus and rail, is being able to partner with our major agencies and actually go out to the field, go to those station and stop areas to do walk audits to really get an idea of what are the issues in that stop or station area. So we see that this can include a multidisciplinary team from both the member cities, member agencies, MAG, and Valley Metro, and include persons such as the people here today from both of our committees, safety staff, engineering staff, and planning staff. And really the goal is to get that local on-the-ground knowledge of what's already happening in these station areas, including any projects that may already be planned but not funded in that station area or stop area. Next slide. So this is just a sample, again, looking at that Osborne Road Central Lab station area of the type of things that the goals of that walk audit would be. So looking at are there opportunities to add bike lanes, barriers such as missing sidewalks, lack of trees, where there's opportunities to add shade trees or shade structures, and then opportunities to add mid-block crossing. So again, this is just an example of the type of things that walk audit would be looking at. Next slide. So putting this all together, this is kind of an outline of what the next steps could look like for this effort. So as soon as the new fiscal year starting next month, being able to kick off that study and develop a scope, looking at both the members here today. So I think really it's a combination of both the transit folk and the active transportation, the streets people, to get an idea of what the scope for this prioritization analysis can look like. This work can then be done by using Valley Metro and MAG staff. No additional contract staff will be needed to really do that analysis, looking at our stops, light rail and bus stops across the region, and getting an idea of where are the highest need areas in those areas. Just hit next. And then kind of maybe in spring, winter next year, is able to take those high priority areas and then do that walk audit, and then complete that effort by doing that documentation of the potential projects. Again, with the goal of having essentially a prioritized list, an idea of where, if future funding were to come, where we want to put that effort into making improvements to transit connections. Next slide. And next again. So just now, I said very brief presentation. So here we are on the final slide. To just really get ideas and to talk to you and get some input on some of these items, and just have an outline here of a few questions. So one of the first one is just the overall thoughts and process of this effort. Thoughts on the criteria, if there's any other data pieces that we should be looking at in prioritizing transit areas. If the scope should be limited to looking at only the high ridership areas in each jurisdiction, so it'd be the highest by jurisdiction. And then more ideas on what this multidisciplinary team doing the walk audits can look like if there's anyone missing. So just open floor right now to kind of get some ideas and some input on overall on this idea and topic.
Anybody have any input or questions for Omar?
Omar, would you, oh, Jason, I do. This is Tiffany.
Okay, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was just wondering if you could remind us who is on the audit team. You know, so, I mean, obviously we want to make sure that there's some consideration of the sick or the elderly that depend on transit to take them to the doctor and so on.
Yeah, Karen, maybe you could flash back to that slide. But I think that's a good point, Tiffany. So we have an opportunity to include people maybe from advocacy groups, or one example that we have from Valley Metro is the VMAG, the Valley Metro Accessibility Advisory Group, having representatives from those groups also come up with us and really see through their eyes what access in transit is like. So I think that's a very good point.
Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks, Omar. Marielle wrote in question 4, the teams could include transit riders and transit operators and local residents. And I'll add to that a little, I guess, for local residents, particularly those with a disability. We've done some walk audits in Chandler that a local resident with a disability will join us, and you really gain a lot of perspective that way. So great comment, Marielle. And then Ellen Kennedy is asking if you can walk back one slide. Ellen, can you unmute yourself and maybe describe what slide you're looking for, and then just verbalize your
The
question?
previous slide that you had with pictures of various considerations that you were going to be thinking about when, okay. So when you were going through this and when you're looking for the potential of bike lanes, I'm wondering if you are going to be looking specifically for lanes of traffic that could be shut down to create, you know, bikeways the way we just saw that San Diego is thinking about, and other cities, not just around the country, but about the world are thinking about. Because, you know, in so many different bike studies that have been completed, it looks as though the traditional bike lane is great for about 1% of the bike riders out there, the road warriors that have no fear whatsoever. That would definitely not be me. But I'm just curious about, you know, what sort of bike lanes are we thinking about? And if we're missing sidewalks, are we thinking about, you know, also the potential for what else might be created? You know, in your picture there, you've got a traditional bike lane and then you've got the sidewalk to nowhere that ends. You know, is there additional space potentially in that right of way to move something next to the sidewalk and out of the roadway, you know, so that you create more opportunity for transit to travel along that roadway, or to create an HOV or bus lane to go through the, I mean, just because of the limited descriptions here, I wanted to encourage that when these walk audits are performed, to be thinking about some of those solutions that we haven't done as much with yet, but that have great potential to help address this first and last mile question, as well as to, you know, address maybe some of the issues that we're having with regard to being a truly multimodal region. So I just wanted to pose that as food for thought. Please and thank you.
No, yes, thank you. I think I agree with all of that. And I think that's part of the reasons why we want to make sure the local jurisdiction, the planners and engineers are there also, because I think they can really help us get an understanding of, they know the area, what can really fit here, what opportunities are there to, as you mentioned, repurposing the traffic lane into a protected bike lane based on the traffic conditions and the traffic flow of that area. So I think those are all great points. I think that I would really want to see come out of this effort.
Thank you, Omar.
Okay, any other questions for Omar?
Sir Crampton, there's one in the chat.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, Christine McMurdy says, once locations are identified, is Valley Metro going to pursue federal funding to construct? To retrofit, there will be right away and other issues, thanks.
Yeah, so I think that those are questions that definitely things to address probably later in the process. But yes, I think everything is on the table with potential funding, especially even federal funds. Even though there is usually strings attached to those funds and more hurdles to pass through to get those funds. So I think there's always some opportunity to be able to address those and use any funding available. And I think that's one of the main goals of that plan is really to see, okay, what are the needs, prioritize those needs and see what funding is available to be able to address and implement those needs. And also, I think just being ready to go once funding does become available. I think a lot of times of what we see, especially at municipal metro, is that some sort of funding becomes available and there's more of a kind of a hurry to figure out, okay, how can we use these funds now? But I think that's one of the goals of the plan is to have something ready to go, even when funding does become available from whatever source that is.
Okay, thanks, Omar. And I think that addressed Kathy Colbath's question too. If you have anything further, Kathy, feel free to speak up.
Hi, Jason. This is Ryan Wozniak. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, Omar. Thanks for the presentation. I'm very familiar with the Main Street and Alma School intersection. That's pretty much my neighborhood. And I'm also on Mesa's transportation board, and then I'm also familiar with the active folks in Rail Mesa, all advocates for more humane light rail corridor. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to mix in those folks into the conversation. I would like to offer up any support into my networks to help with that walking audit as that's coming to fruition. I'd also just encourage tactical urbanism, temporary installments to help address some of these concerns with regards to where the funding's coming from, temporary structures or types of treatment to test out and get people excited before funding is committed. So I've been urging the city of Mesa to consider doing tactical things for some time to help ramp up or fill out their toolbox on how they go about traffic calming. So I see this as, you know, another potential opportunity for that application.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with all of those statements, right?
Thanks, Ryan. Omar, I had a question. On your timeline, you showed a phase 1 this year and a phase 2 next year, and phase 2 clearly have a lot of interaction with city agencies. Would phase 1 also include outreach to the different cities to get their thoughts on when as you're conducting the analysis?
Yeah, so what I see happening during phase 1, during that conducting is some frequent feedback loops. So one of the first things that we'll have to do is really get that local data, get local crash data, the street network data. So that's one of the first steps in getting information from the cities. I think as we walk through the process, there will be opportunities to kind of come up frequently to groups like this and kind of share the results as we are getting it, doing that analysis. I think I'm open to figuring out if there's other ways of kind of having more hand in hand as we conduct the analysis. We could probably form a technical advisory group that meets more formally and frequently. But I think we already have these groups set up that are meeting, and I think we'll just be having the opportunity to come to those groups as we have results.
Yeah, thanks, Omar. I think, I don't know if there's necessarily a need for a tag, but definitely some outreach to the cities. You had asked a question on your last slide about, you know, should we just look at the highest ridership bus stops overall, or should we look at the highest ridership by jurisdiction? And I think we should look at each jurisdiction and the highest ridership locations in each jurisdiction, but I think a lot of that is going to be up to each jurisdiction and their level of interest in the study and what they want to see. So I think that kind of outreach earlier on before we get to the walkthrough would be welcome.
Okay.
Any other questions for Omar? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation, and we look forward to working on this over the next year or so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 5, request for future agenda item. Does anybody have anything they would like to request? Okay, sounds like there's none. So we'll move on to item number 6, adjournment. I'll go ahead and adjourn the transit committee, and then I'll pass it on to Jose for the active transportation. So can I get a motion from somebody on the transit committee to adjourn?
This is Sean from the City of Buckeye. I motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Sean. And a second?
This is Kristen from Surprise. I'll second.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, transit committee is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Can I get a motion from the active transportation committee for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Is that Randy? Okay, so I got
Yes,
Randy.
I am.
Okay, I got Randy as a first. Do I have a second?
Second, Robert.
Robert Yavis. All right, so we have a first and a second. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Aye.
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 All right, so we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Robert.